Thank you again for being here. It's a pleasure to welcome our guests, Rabbanit Michal Nagen and Dr. Tanya White. Rabbanit Michal Nagen is the head of Mechina Tzahali, a pioneering pre-army academy for religious girls and a respected educator and spiritual leader. She writes and lectures widely on the intersection of faith, identity and civic responsibility, and has been a guiding presence for young women for decades. Dr. Tanya White is a senior lecturer at Matan Women's Institute for Torah Learning and teaches Jewish philosophy at Bar-Ilan University. Her writings and lectures explore theology, Tanakh and modern Jewish thought with intellectual rigor and emotional depth. She's also the founder and host of Books and Beyond, the Rabbi Sacks Podcast, where she explores contemporary issues through the lens of Jewish wisdom. Today, they will discuss how does crisis affect faith, a conversation after October 7. We thank you both for being here and welcome you to the podium.
It's so very special to be here among so many people, expats, as they might say, and maybe Israelis as well, who knows. And I am especially honored to have a conversation today with Rabbanit Michal Nagen. It really is a true honor to be in conversation with her, and I hope we're going to jump straight in. I hope you're going to be able to get some insightful meaning and understanding of the framing, perhaps even, of where we are today. And I want to begin with kind of maybe even an intro, a statement, a way of understanding what we're about to do. I'm going to do that by bringing a kind of a adage that is used very often by used by many people, but it originates with Theodor Adorno, who was wrote a philosopher after the Holocaust, and he said very specifically that no poetry, any poetry that's written after Auschwitz is barbaric. And very, obviously, as with any kind of major statement, we try and understand what does he mean by that. And I think one of the things that I'm totally always cognizant of is that language is a breaking out. Language is imposing order on sometimes a very chaotic situation. And when we write poetry after something so cataclysmic and barbaric, maybe what we're trying to do is to beautify something that can't be beautified. We're trying to impose order on something that cannot and has no order to it. And I want to say this because I sometimes feel that words betray. And I'll tell you that immediately after October the 7th, on October the 8th, I was sitting in my garden and I thought to myself, Tanya, for 7 years you wrote, you researched, you spoke about Holocaust theology, and you wrote almost 200,000 words, 600 footnotes, God knows what, and for a year I had no words. And I sat in my garden looking up at the bees in the going into the flowers, thinking, how can the world still be going? How can nature still be happening? Because when there is such a cataclysmic shock to the order, there's no words, there's no order, there's nothing that can kind of portray or convey that feeling of cohesiveness that we need in order to structure our reality. So I want to say something today. And Michal's going to talk about her own individual personal experiences. But I want to say that there may be sitting in this room people who have lost family members over the last 2 years, maybe even earlier. There are people here who have gone through personal traumas. Everyone is carrying pekelech. And I want to say that in our conversation, I'm always very conscious that when we speak, we are betraying. Because we're always going to betray the personal experience of the moment, the cataclysmic moment of chaos, because there's no way to put that into words. Like Elie Wiesel says, someone said to him, how and why do you write? He said, because if I don't write, there will be nothing left. But I know that when I do write, I'm betraying the victims. And that writing, that speaking, those words are a betrayal, but at the same time, they're an absolute mandate. So I think that by way of kind of going into our conversation, I think it's important to note that. And I think we both feel that. And now to go back to our topic today, which is crisis after, or faith in crisis. And what Michal and I will do, Rabbanit Michal and I will do, is that we're going to try and understand what this means. What does faith, why do we talk about a crisis of faith? What does that even mean, a crisis of faith? And specifically post-October the 7th. Is there something about that moment that invites a kind of reframing of the way in which we think about faith? So I want to just, I'll talk perhaps about how I understand this notion of crisis of faith, and then Rabbanit Michal will talk about the way that she does. And I want to begin with Martin Heidegger, not the most friendly of philosophers to the Jewish people, but I want to speak about what he says because I think it's a really important way of understanding it. He talks about the idea of a ready-to-hand world, and he says that in our world in which we live, there are things that are ready to hand. So, for example, if I'm typing on my computer, I'm not actually thinking about the fact that my fingers are touching the keyboard. I'm thinking about the thoughts that I am processing into the document that I'm writing. But the moment that one of my keyboard pieces stops working, what happens is that ready-to-hand world cracks. And at that moment, I am conscious of the fact that there is a breakage in my ready-to-hand world, in the order and the structures in which I am existing and I am functioning. What Heidegger meant here is that as human beings, all of us, at one moment or another, because we're human beings, are going to have a breakage in our world, in our order. And very often when we think about faith, we think about belief. And a belief is an ordering of my meaningful infrastructure of my life. Belief or faith gives me a meaningful infrastructure and order in which to put my belief systems, the way in which I think the world works, my relationship with something transcendent into the world. But what happens when there's a moment that breaks that order? And I think many, many of us know that we, in some senses as human beings, oscillate between order and chaos. Between that moment of tohu vohu, that total primordial chaos that sometimes enters into our life. And I can list here a whole number of events where that happens. Death, divorce, financial problems, anything and everything. Wars, earthquakes, genocides, whatever you want to call it. Those, and it can be anything as small as the keyboard breaking down. Those moments often lead us into this kind of moment of tohu vohu, and we have to try and recalibrate. And when we recalibrate, that moment, by the way, is why it's called in psychological language a breakdown, because something has broken down in the infrastructure of our meaning, in the infrastructure of the world in which comes to us, in which we meet the world and our relationship with others and our relationship with order. And I believe that very often when we think about faith, we think, oh, that gives us the tools to deal with disorder, with chaos, with uncertainty. We have faith. But many of us know that that's not the case. I remember always, like, I used to meet someone, they said to me, oh, ze kol kach kal lach ki at datiya. It's so easy for you because you're religious, because you've got that way of structuring your world. And I dafka said, no, religion doesn't give me all the answers. And so today I want to speak, I think we'd like to enter into that space of the in-between, the space of the tohu, the vohu, of the primordial chaos, of the disorder, of the moment in which things break down, and ask the question, how, as religious people, what is faith? And I don't necessarily believe that it's that belief system that gives us total order. I actually think that it's the opposite. And I think for me, that's why in some ways that idea of crisis of faith isn't such an oxymoron, Because for me, faith is often that moment. Faith is that place of the middle space, of the space in which I'm navigating between the order and the disorder, between the ready-to-hand world and the chaos, the primordial chaos. And I think that the Torah gives us the most incredible tools, and perhaps we'll share a few of those tools and those narratives in how to navigate that space between those two things. And even more than that, I would say that Jewish faith is not about turning to God and saying, give me order, give me certainty, right? Save me from this or save me from that. I think dafka the opposite. Jewish faith is what I like to term in philosophical language covenantal faith, covenantal religion. And covenantal religion says, when we wake up every morning, Modani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam, bechemla rabba emunatecha. Every single morning we stand up and we say, today may be a day in which I may come face to face with that primordial chaos, with that tohu vohu, with that keyboard that doesn't work, okay? But at that moment I know that my faith isn't predicated on there being order. My faith isn't predicated on God coming to save me and knowing that everything's going to fall back into place. My faith is predicated on the fact that God has emunatecha, rabba emunatecha, be, that God has faith in me, and that maybe my faith is about having faith in myself and my relationship with God that gives me the tools to navigate this space of brokenness. So, Michal, I wonder how you would look at this crisis of faith. I haven't touched on October the 7th yet, but we'll get there.
Wow. You're such an artist with the words, and I feel that I am twice behind you. First of all,
if I was speaking in Hebrew, I'd be 5 times behind you, so don't worry about that.
It's fine. If you're the leader, it's wonderful to be behind you. First of all, English is not my nothing. I only married an American guy, so I married into the language. And besides, talking about great pain, I think it's more than trauma. I think pain and words consist in our hearts in 2 different levels. And whenever you touch the pain, you lose the words. So since we are talking about very, 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 if we want to be honest, and I will do my best to be honest, this is like a life mission to try to be honest. I have to do what? לדבר למיקרופון. How do you do that in English? So I'm saying in my journey to be honest, I will try to be honest, but it will take me also to the levels of pain that might, when I start to stutter, please understand me. So you said very interestingly the question, is it easier for us because we believe in God? So I think the answer for me at least was the opposite. Not only that a personal crisis brings tremendous pain, the feeling of, here I lose my words.
Yeah,
the feeling of betray, it's not only from the human world. I mean, Ribbono Shel Olam betrayed us also. So this is another level that we have to heal or to have to mend because we got torn. So it's definitely, we're not seeking simple answers or easy life, but this is one thing. And the second thing that maybe is a little bit helpful, being religious in this journey, is that we deeply believe that everything has a meaning. I mean, at least I think being religious or living under the sight of Ribbono Shel Olam makes my life, or that I'm supposed to translate, לא, איך אומרים לפרש? To comment, איך אומרים? This thing, you understand me, right? לפרש, to have a commentary. I have to be, to do this thing to my life all the time. Every step. I think that educates me as a religious person when I get into a big crisis. So this is two introductions. Now, maybe I have to start with a personal something to say. משהו. My pain and my trauma it does not connect to the 7th of October and does not connect to the military life. It wasn't a terror attack. It wasn't chas v'shalom ovdan. Although I grew up in a mishpachat hashchol, but that wasn't the main crisis of my life because I grew up into this family. My uncle fell in one of the wars, but you know, that's past history already. It's not the things now. But what happened 7 years ago for me was that I realized that the life that I thought that I'm living was actually different. The memories came back to me, something that I always knew, but I didn't have a cohesive memory of a very, very, very troubled childhood. That unfortunately I was exposed to a terrible man. He was a teacher in my school, and he, like all the predators, knew how to לנצל הזדמנויות. Take advantage. It was Yom Kippur War. I was 5 years old, the youngest kid in school, and as I said, my uncle didn't come back from the war. They didn't know where he is. He was shavui. Now, after that, they realized that he will never come back, but it was a very, very, very tense time to the family, and he took advantage of that. And since then, from about 5 years, I was there are no nice word to say that. הייתי
sexually abused.
You can say that.
Sexually abused.
I was abused by him, like a big man can terrorized the אנשים צעירים שנמצאים תחת ידם. You see, I'm losing my words. And the fact that I'm smiling is also when I get to a very, very deep pain. It's not that I'm laughing or something, but smiling helps me go on. So 7 years ago, I realized not only that I have to deal with these terrible memories and all the things that I realized that what I thought was normal life was bichlal not normal life. I also had to bridge over a huge feeling of betray, because it's not only the teachers in my school betrayed me. I mean, the whole world betrayed me. I was a lost child. How come nobody saw? How come nobody helped me? How come Ribbono Shel Olam let this situation happen? So what happened in the 7th of October, that I was 5 years into the healing process. I was 5 years into trying to build my life again. And I want to share with you, as a religious person and as a Rabbanit, I have to teach all the time. So איך אומרים? losing my words. תשתית הידע שלי.
My foundation of my knowledge.
The foundation of my knowledge was חסידות ותנ"ך ותורה. So I was discussing those things in my head over and over and over again. So let me share with you a wonderful, wonderful limud of a Baal Shem Tov. And it's unbelievable the depths that he takes us in. He says like that. He says, Vayomer Elohim yehi or vayehi or. Right? Everybody knows this phrase. And Baal Shem Tov asks, why do we need, I mean, why twice? Vayomer Elohim yehi or, boom, light. Why do we need the vayehi or? Or why do the Tanakh says it this way? And then he says that in his word, vayehi, that the way הריבונו של עולם מלביש את עצמו, because האינסוף של האור, איך אומרים אינסוף, Tanya, help me.
If infinite
love. Very difficult words in your language. באינסוף comes off of the light, and you have to see it or to grab it. The Ribono Shel Olam has to make it smaller to our size. But the word Vayehi, listen to the word. You hear the Vay inside the word Vayehi? That's the soul. And Baal Shem Tov says that through the sorrow, through the pain, you get to understand some of the light. Now, this is amazing because the first thing you want to say to Ribono Shel Olam, thank you, I don't need that. Toda rabba, I'll manage without it. No need to the sorrow, no need for the light. But this is a decision that we don't get to make. The decision is not what will you have to go through in your life or what I had to. I didn't choose it. I didn't choose this particular biography. I would never choose it. But since I'm feeling it and I'm experiencing it, so there is some light that I can get from it. And this was interesting. It's nothing that I could do in the beginning. In the beginning it was only darkness. It was terrible, terrible times. But nowadays the understanding of the light that comes from the Vayehi is very, very, very interesting and important for me.
Michal, I want to just add to that it's very interesting that in Hebrew, to go back to the idea of the mashber, that in Hebrew, mashber literally comes from the word shevel, which is a breakage. And there's lots of imageries of breakage throughout the Tanakh, right? Specifically, the one thing I can straight away comes to mind is the breaking of the luchot, which sit together with the whole luchot. But I think mashber is also in Hebrew not just breakage, but we also know that a mashber is a birthing stool. And I think that there's something within the very makeup of Jewish thinking that kind of elicits this very, very deep understanding that as human beings, there is a journey that we're all on. And part of that journey is to be in that zone of constantly oscillating between breakage and birthing. And not birthing in the sense of literal birthing, the feminine type of birth, but birthing in the sense of birthing new possibilities. And if we think for a minute, what makes a human being unique, what raises us above other species is our ability to imagine a world and a possibility and a reality that isn't here at the moment. No other animal, no one else can do that. Our ability to imagine something different, to birth a new reality into being, is a uniquely human feature. And to me, that rests at the heart of what you're saying, which again, without betraying the experience of anyone who goes through terrible shevel, terrible breakage, because I imagine that the darkness and the tohu vo and the cataclysmic kind of unraveling is so enormous that you can never at that particular moment see a way out. But as I'm using your language because you've been through it, to be able to navigate and find that light, and it reminds me of the very first time we see in the Torah. Can I share like a Torah narrative? Because did you want to add more before I jump into it? So I was thinking a lot about Adam and Chava in Gan Eden, which is really that first moment of shevel, right? They have this beautiful paradise. It's just, everything is perfect. It's, in Sheryl Sandberg's words, option A. And she has a book called Option B. She's the CEO. Her husband died very suddenly, and she wrote this book called Option B. And in that book, she talks about how every human being faces at some point an option B reality, because life is never exactly the way we want it to be. That's part of what it means to live as a human being. And option A is Gan Eden. And then all of a sudden, we won't go into the whole reasoning why, but they have to leave Gan Eden. And before they leave, God talks to them, and he says to the woman, you're going to give birth to children, be'itzavon, and to the man he says, be'etzev tildi banim, and to the man he says, be'itzavon tochlena kol yomei chayecha, right? And this word etzev, which is what you were saying, sorrow, pain. Etzev really is the gap between the world as I expect it to be, my option A reality, like, oh, I thought that the world was going to give me everything I wanted, right? And the world as it actually is, the reality of the world that we face, which is not in most circumstances not the option A. And that etzev, that sorrow, and sorrow I don't think is a good translation. Literally the translation is the gap between the how I want it, the expectation, and the reality. And the only people, that by the way is where suffering happens. By the way, for animals, when do animals suffer? When they feel physical pain. When do humans suffer the most? When there is a gap between the world as we expect it to be and the world that is. That is where suffering happens. That is etzev. And it takes me back to your light, because something amazing happens. At that moment, when God turns to Adam and tells him, you're basically dust, and to dust you'll return, and you're leaving option A, and you're leaving this idealistic reality. And Adam, at that moment, I always say, like, if it was me, I would have put the blanket over my head, took my computer, watched Netflix for the rest of my life, right? But instead, what does he do? He does something unbelievable. He names Chava Em Kol Chai. To me, that is the shever and the mashbel. Adam births a new reality into existence. He literally says, he's lefaresh. He interprets his reality different. Instead of saying, okay, everything is terrible as God basically described it, I'm looking at this woman now, and I'm seeing in this woman not the person who caused this to happen to me, not the person who's now going to have pain when she gives childbirth, not the person who is the reason why I'm being thrown out of Gan Eden. I'm seeing her as the mother of all living things. Like, wow. And that is that navigating that space between shevel and mashbel, or between the birth stool and the birthing of new possibilities and the ability to see the light. And what does God do? God turns around and he gives him a ketone ol. And we know that aleph and ayin are very often interchangeable. And the ketone ol is essentially a garment of light. Because God says to Adam, that is the only way to navigate mashbel, to navigate etzev. And it is, I personally believe, and all of us, every single person sitting in this room has had personal mashberim. It is the hardest command of all the commandments that God gives to us. And it's not really even a commandment, because it's definitely not in the 613. But it is the hardest human task to say, can I interpret my reality and choose life? Or can I let it sink me down? And then the question of emunah comes in, because emunah is that place of, does emunah give me a way to offer illusions that everything's going to be okay, that it's going to be great, that don't worry, God will save me, or God is punishing me and therefore I deserve this, and therefore God is, giving me this and it's a terrible, and then I close the gap because, okay, the world's not perfect, but I deserve it because God's punishing me. The world is terrible, but we deserve it. But that, all of those things, all of those paths lead me to being passive. And Adam here isn't passive. Adam here is active. He's an active interpreter of his reality. I wonder what you think on that in terms of your own journey.
Wow, Tanya, thank you so much for this commentary. It's such a present you gave us all. Thank you so much. I think it's very, 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 very true. And I think we have to add another musag. מה קרה לאנגלית שלי?
Another idea. Or concept.
Another concept. And I want to refer to it when we discussed our plans were completely different, of course, as always plans are going.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I veered off
wonderful.
Option A, option B, in between, I kind of did that. I stepped into the unknown area.
But you had a wonderful, wonderful way of making me think, because you said, let's think about the Tanakh and how do we read it differently. So the
differently, I think we were speaking in light of October the 7th specifically.
Yeah. But anyhow, I was thinking about Akedat Yitzchak, and I wanted, first of all, to share, we are all, I see the ages here. Akedat Yitzchak, usually when you go through the tefillot or you go through the heritage of Am Yisrael, this is the highest level of emunah. And then comes the 7th of October. All our sons are getting those Tzav Shmone, and we are all there. We are all there. 3 sons, just like that. 2 hours into the situation, are in the battle, and you go through the understanding, the basic understanding of Avraham Avinu, that Ribono Shel Olam is menaseh otanu. And what a terrible, life is different after you've been through this day and those 2 years. But after that, and going through this time, being very, very, very close to the younger generation, being the head of Mechina Kdam Tzvait, I see not only the boys, and you get to see that the spotlight is bichlal lo on Avraham Avinu, but it is much, much more on Yitzchak. And I think it's not surprising that the Tanakh is writing from the nekudat mabat of the parent, because we sit near the computer and we write history. But the generation who is active and doing and willing to go and to be in Mesirut Nefesh, this is a wonderful gilui of choosing Ribono Shel Olam. It's not that they were chosen by Ribono Shel Olam. It's that they choose him to be their God, to be their... איך אומרים את זה באנגלית לעזאזל? אני עוברת לעברית? תסתדרו, תהיו חזקים. תניה, תתרגמי אותי, אין לי כוח.
It's a pleasure.
אנחנו נסתדר עם זה, נכון? אבל באמת תתרגמי אותי, it's not that I'm losing my word, I only need שפת הקודש to say those wonderful ideas, because it became so crystal clear that if you go and you're willing to be part of Am Yisrael, so you choose the light over the darkness. And it's so, זה כל כך ברור שלנו יש מה ללמוד מהדור של יצחק. שלנו יש מה ללמוד מהמוכנות שלהם לא להיכנס לנקודת מבט קורבנית.
It's so obvious that we need to learn from the generation of Yitzchak not to enter into the perspective of being the victim.
Yeah, they're willing to give everything, but they don't see themselves as victims. They see themselves, and we should see themselves and ours as privileged people. That יש לנו את היכולת לתעדף, לחיות לפי הערכים שלנו, לשים את העיקר מקדימה.
That we need to live according to our values and put the essence above everything, the essence of our values above everything else.
This is a big zchut. I think that carries me over those 2 years of, it's like a roller coaster of feelings, because there are one day that I'm in the depths of despair, and the second day I'm in the highest of feeling of euphoria and nes and Ribono Shel Olam itanu, and then maybe hours after that I'm already again hopeless. And I think the journey and to be able to pick your point of view, this is freedom. And I thank God every day that I'm a free person to do this.
Michal, how did you arrive at that perspective through your own journey?
Oy, oy, oy. You ask the hard questions.
You willing to share?
Yes, definitely. I think I should. I think it gives meaning to all the things we've been through. So when all the memories probably more or less came back in one evening, suddenly everything made sense. I understood why I have such terrible nightmares. Why do I mean, there was no higayon in the amount of fear and kaev that I had, because I thought I had a wonderful childhood, and the memories came back, and I had one rule. I don't know even why I had it so well menusach. I'm trying to think of the term. Formulated in my head. But the first thing I said was, without bli sodot ve bli shkarim. That was like a guideline.
Without secrets, without lies.
No lies, no secrets. I think that the main chavaya that I had, that he was of course afraid that I will talk. So he made me swear and threaten me in different ways that I will not talk. And so getting him over my shoulder, over my back, getting the freedom again, was to decide never to do that. But the path, bli sodot ve bli shkarim, so the first thing, of course, I went home and I told Yaakov everything. I actually gave him back my wedding ring, and I told him, Yaakov, I'm not sure. You see, I'm smiling again. When I get to the depth of pain, I'm not sure you picked me for the right reasons, or at least what you thought was me. Now I realize that I'm completely different, so I want you to choose again. So I gave him my wedding ring. Of course, it got lost since then, so it's not that it has a happy ending, this part of the story. But I felt that I have to go through the darkness, but Emet should have her own light. So that was the first thing. And then I wanted to tell my son. My son was married then 1 week. I think it was connected. The thing that I started to remember was because our oldest son got just married. So I called him and I said, Hileli, I need to tell you something. I'm very confused. But I want you to know, and we spoke. I told him what I remembered then. It was very, very in the beginning. And then I told him, please go and tell your wife. So he said, are you sure? I said, of course I'm sure. She's your wife. First of all, bli sodot ve bli shkarim. And then I tried to bring all my kids together. It was very complicated. Of course, their sizes was very different. And we all went to some kind of a family therapy. So they're asking, is Shira coming? She's my daughter-in-law. You understand? It's the first month of her. We have 7 kids, Baruch Hashem, but not all of them came. Some of them were very small. And I said, of course Shira is coming. And they say, why? And I said, because there is only one way to make a family, לתפקד.
Function.
All that we leave her aside, and then she's always in the side. Or we said, we're all together. So we're all together. So we went, and it was very, very good. The therapist made us talk, and she said, and everybody was talking, and I thought that Shira would be, a little bit, she's new in the family, falling into this situation. And then Shira said, I want to say something. So everybody's looking at her, what do you have to say? Newcomer. And then she said, I will never forget it, and I am eternally thankful for her. She said, Ima, I'm so proud that you are my mother. And I thought to myself, this is a gift. What a present I got from her. Because this this is a commentary, right? Because I didn't feel pride in anything. I was in the middle, the pit of shame. I mean, sexual harassment. What do you think? It mainly comes with shame, and the fact my kids might be polite, but my daughter-in-law to say something like that. She gave me. It was an amazing gift. She's really a wonderful person, and I'm so thankful for her. But that was the Bli Sodot Ubli Shkarim. It was the beginning. It was one of the guidelines. That was one of them. The second of them. What I'm doing now, which is, you see, very complicated for me, is also part of being free. Otherwise, he's leading my life. He keeps on controlling me, and all the time, like whenever I do it, it's like standing with Begav Zakuf again and again. I choose light. And so the second thing I understood, I didn't even have it very well phrased in my mind, but I understood that what he was doing, and anybody who doesn't know what happened in very, very complex traumas, that you get separated. You get separated. For example, I got separated from my memories. How could that be? That's the way it works. Under terrible stress for many, many years, being a very young child. So אם הרע מנתק, אז הטוב צריך לחבר. תוכלו לעזור לי עם זה בבקשה.
If the evil disconnects, then the good has to connect back to it.
It has to be an active
integration.
כן, זה צריך להיות מעשה אקטיבי. To resist זה רע, to exist, לא, to resist.
To resist, yeah.
To resist evil, we have to be active in bringing things together, bringing myself together. For example, my public figure into my being me. I mean, this is healing for me. Standing here and not being the model, but being the real person. For me, this is healing because this is bringing my two parts together. But it's not only that; it's bringing the family together. It's bringing the Am together. The togetherness. This is the way הריבונו של עולם מתגלה בעולם. And I have a story to tell that, but I will keep quiet.
No.
That's fine.
No, I just wanted, firstly, I think we can all be supremely grateful to Michal for having the courage and the bravery and the...
So I can go now?
To be able to stand up in front of people.
Thank you very much for listening. I mean, it's not such a story. And
to be able to tell such a deeply painful story. But Michal, it's interesting. It was making me think a lot about the time we're in at the moment, which is called Ben HaMetzarim. And we talk about, very famously in one of the Tehillim, Min HaMetzar Karatiya Anani B'merchavya. And to just take us back to the idea that we were speaking about at the beginning of what faith is. And specifically, I would say, what is biblical faith? Like, what does faith look like in the Bible? Like, very often we go to, the 13 Principles of Faith of the Rambam, or we go, which has some Greek influences, which has some propositional beliefs, kind of dogma, the idea that, but there's something so profound about what you've been saying here, which takes me back to this Meitzal Anani B'merchavya, and the idea of being able to hold many, many different things in an open space. And when you're in a Meitzal, when you're in like a narrow place, right? Anxiety, fear, trauma, all of those things physiologically narrow us. Our breathing becomes shorter. Psychologically narrows us because we can't see outside of them. And so when the Tehillah speaks about the idea of, I call to you, God, in my narrow space, but where does God answer us? B'merchavya. Meaning God answers us in the narrow space, but sometimes we are so stuck in our trauma, in the place where we can't see beyond the very parochial, narrow space that we're in. We can't see beyond that. So only when we get beyond that and begin to see the picture, the big picture, does God answer us. And it reminds me, there was a brilliant cartoon in Makor Rishon a few weeks ago. They did like a whole load of cartoons about October the 7th, and one of them had like a woman, like a young mother with the divided head. And one head was like, you know, angry and like despairing, and the other one was like happy, and it was talking about the feelings that people had in the Mamad during the war with Iran. And she said, on the one hand, I know that I'm living a time of miracles and I can see the big picture and this is a historical moment, and at the other, like, my kids are driving me crazy and they're pulling on my sleeve, and I can't think about what I'm going to do the next minute. And you're stuck in this dialectical tension. And it reminded me, and everything you were saying as well, this ability to heal that comes from moving into a more open space where you're able to see that things have been disconnected and there's been disintegration, and you're able to move to the space where you can integrate memories that have been repressed or things that haven't, and to be able to see all sides of the coin. And it reminds me of my grandfather, who was a Holocaust survivor. I always tell this story because it's how I came to write my doctorate on post-Holocaust theology. He died when I was very young, like 13, but in the memories I have before, he was a very, very pious Orthodox Jew. He lost his entire family in the Holocaust. He came to fight in the 1948 war here in Israel, and he met my grandmother, who was a kinder transport survivor here in Israel. Dafka, she had gone to England, but they came here for the Maccabeah Games. They met here, and he went back to England, and they built a beautiful life. But he never, ever, ever spoke about. He spoke once to my cousin about his experiences, very, very minimally. But every Leil HaSeder, when it came to Vihi Sha'amda, he started screaming. He would go red in the face and he'd start screaming. And he'd say, "It's not true. God didn't save us." And the next minute, he would ensure that he'd eaten exactly the halachic proportion of maror until his face went red. And he would, be davening. And as a 9, 10, 11-year-old, I couldn't understand his faith. I just couldn't understand it. It was something that perplexed me, and I just said, what is this? And many, many years later, when I came to read the theology of Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg, who speaks about dialectical faith after the Holocaust, only then did I actually begin to understand and to frame the faith of my grandfather. And it took me back to this idea of that faith. We often think of faith as like this person said, "Oh, you're dati, everything must be fine." No, faith, like everything else, is a relationship between us and Rabbanu Shel Olam, and it's complex, and it swings, and it goes back, and it goes forth, and it's a dance, and sometimes we feel close, and sometimes we feel distance, and that dialectical tension between different ways of experiencing our reality and experiencing God, but allowing ourselves to be in the space, the open space, to make place for all of those things, for all of those feelings, for integrating all of those things together. Maybe oscillating, maybe having moments where we're angry, as you said, God betrayed me. That feeling, and I'm sure that's the feeling my grandfather felt. And by the way, he had 3 daughters, my mother and her 2 sisters, and they would say to him, "But Daddy, look at your grandchildren sitting around your table. Look, God ensured that the Jewish people survive." And at that moment of the betrayal, he couldn't see it. Of course he could see it other times. Like the woman with her 2 faces, I can see that we're living in historic moments. We've all felt that since October the 7th. We're living in historic moments. But when you're in it, and when you're opening every day, Hutala Prosum, and you're seeing the faces of the beautiful soldiers, and when you're knowing that you don't know what's going to happen, and when you think that this day we've had one success, but then the next day everything else is fallen, and you're seeing the anti-Semitism rise in the world, and you're knowing that there's something big going on, but you don't, and you can't at that moment feel it, that rainbow of emotions vis-a-vis God, vis-a-vis the world, vis-a-vis Ribono Shel Olam is so complex, as it is, by the way, in every grown-up relationship. When we're a child, everything's very black and white. We look at our parents, they're perfect, they know everything, we listen to them, everything's good, okay? But as we grow up, or I think nowadays it gets younger and younger, there's this moment where they suddenly realize, oh, you know what, my parent is not perfect. And actually this is going to be quite messy. And how am I never going to navigate that space of, wanting to break away from my parents? And that, in many ways, why is it that the Tanakh anthropomorphizes God? Not because God is a human, but because we're human. And the only medium through which we can understand God is the medium through which we understand the world, and that is through human relationships. And so the Torah frames God as a wife, and a husband, frames God as a parent and a child, because all of those relationships are messy, and all of those relationships are complex, and they are beautiful, and they are rich, and they are vibrant, and they are alive, and they're full of life. And that's our relationship with the Rabbanit Michal Nagen. That is our relationship with God, where there is very often this very difficult dialectical tension. And to me, B'tkufat ben hamitzarim, in the period that we're in at the moment, maybe one of the problems of this period is that we didn't see the big picture. That we don't see the other. We didn't see the other in their fullness, and that led to sinat chinam. We didn't see God in the big picture of the world, and that led to us disconnecting from God. And I think that maybe perhaps one of the imperatives today and in this moment is to enter back into the merchav yah. What does that mean? Ask ourselves, what does that mean to be in the open space? What does that mean for me as a person? For me as a person, navigating my own trauma, navigating our national trauma, navigating many other things. And we don't have time. I wanted to speak about Yaakov, but I think it goes to exactly what you were saying. Because Yaakov moves from the tent, which is that narrow prism perspective of God. Everything is in the tent, everything. And he's always got to go. And in the end, he goes out and he leaves it. And he comes to this place which is open. And all of a sudden, he has this dream of ladders going up and down. And you know what he says? Hayesh Elokim b'makom hazeh va'anochi lo yadati. God is in this place, and I didn't know myself. Wow. When we find God in the open places, that's also when we find who we really are. When we find God in places we don't expect him to be, when we exit the tent, when we exit our narrow vision, when we exit our ways of, and Yaakov is Ekev, he's the heel. He always sees himself as the victim until he faces the Ish and he becomes Yashar El, Yisrael, straight. He gets a name and he oscillates. The trauma that he's been carrying is integrated when he is literally with that person, and he moves from being Ekev, being a victim, to being Yashar, to being Shalem, to being a full person who understands what it is to carry faith, emunah, which is really the idea, not of blind faith, not of a narrowness of seeing, but of something quite the opposite, which is really a faithfulness, a trusting, a relationship with God that's real.
Wow, Rabbanit Tanya, such a wonderful, wonderful teacher. So the story that I wanted to share, it's from Shir HaShirim Rabbah, and it's exactly emphasized what you wanted to say. So we're such a great couple. So it says in Shir HaShirim Rabbah there is a story, and it's known as Hazug Mitzidon. If everybody knows it, it's actually not in Tzidon. They should be placed in Bet Tzaida, but this is the story, okay? How do we do that? Shall I read it in Hebrew? Thank you. Good answer. 3 דקות. I have to read it quickly. נשא אישה ושהה עמה 10 שנים ולא ילדה. בסדר? אינו רשאי להיבטל מהמצווה. והיה הסיפור על אישה אחת מצידן, ששהתה 10 שנים עם בעלה ולא ילדה. באו לפני רבי שמעון בר יוחאי. רצו להתגרש, זה מזה. אמר להם, אני אגיד במילים שלי, remember the big חתונה that you had? Remember all the people? Remember you had good food? Remember you had music? כשם שנזדווגתם זה לזה במסיבה, ככה גם תיפרדו. תעשו ארוחה טובה. Okay, they go home and they make a very nice fistalach, as Yaakov calls it, very good food. And she gives him a little bit more to drink, and she gets him a little bit tipsy, a little bit. And then he refers to her, והוא אומר לה, זה חייב להיות בעברית, זה שפה כל כך יפה, הוא אומר לה, ביתי, ראי כל חפץ טוב שיש לי בבית, וקחי אותו.
Take every beautiful object there's in the house.
ותלכי לבית אביך.
Take it to your father's house.
תקחי זהב, תקחי ספרים, תקחי ריטים יפים, תקחי את כל המניות שיש לנו בבנק, תקחי כל דבר טוב שיש לנו בבית. Why am I saying that in Hebrew? Take, הבנתם. והיא עושה בדיוק את זה. And when he falls asleep, she calls her servants and she says, take him. And they take the bed and they move it to her father's home. And then he wakes up and he asks her, where am I? And she said, you're in my father's home. She said, what am I doing here? And she said, ולא כך אמרת לי בערב? כל חפץ טוב שיש בביתי, תלי אותו והביאיהו לבית אביך? אין לי חפץ טוב בעולם יותר ממך. And they went back to Rashbi and he prayed for them and they stayed together and they had children. It's okay, forget about the story. What happened בתשעה באב? בתשעה באב, ריבונו של עולם wanted to break the house. What did עם ישראל did? They took one חפץ טוב. They took ריבונו של עולם with them to the גלות. And we kept the ברית. What did we do in 7 באוקטובר? We took one חפץ טוב that we had. ואנחנו שמרנו את הברית. זאת הבחירה שלנו. ואנחנו נמשיך לעשות את זה. ותודה רבה רבה רבה.
תודה.